Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Corey. I am the coordinator here in research ethics. Some of you I may have communicated with, so you might know who I am. For those of you who do not, I essentially work mostly with faculty research projects that involve human participants. I have a colleague, Karen, who deals mostly with student protocols as well as animal research. But I'll get to that in a little bit later. I will share my presentation with all of you. Okay, so we are good. Everybody can see it?
Okay.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to just start I'm going to give everybody a bit of an overview around ethics and go over the background along with the principles of research ethics, the scope, and how the process works here at Concordia. We can ask questions. We can do a Q&A session at the end of the presentation for anybody who may have questions. So a bit of background. So throughout the 20th century, there were a lot of research projects being carried out without the proper regulations in place, which ended up putting human participants at greater risk. And as we can see here, there's some notable examples include the Stanford prison experiment, infants being exposed to high levels of x-rays for dubious purposes, medical research whereby participants were administered toxic substances, and situations where medication, was withheld from participants, such as the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. In Canada, an example of this would be a project carried out by the Canadian government, whereby they carried out nutritional experiments on malnourished children in residential schools in the 1940s and the 1950s. So the principles. So the regulations around ethics that we have in place are a result of these controversial experiments that further harmed participants. And so according to the Tri-Council Policy Statement, or the TCPS, there are 3 principles, which I'll go over briefly, but more details concerning these principles can be found in the TCPS statement, which you can just Google by just typing in the TCPS, and the latest version is from 2022. The Tri-Council is made up of the 3 major Canadian funding agencies, such as the CIHR, HREC, and NSERC. So the first principle is respect for persons. So consent should be voluntary and informed process. Certain groups of participants must have more protection in place. So, minors, individuals with developmental or cognitive disabilities or impairments, employees, prisoners. And the consent form should provide participants with the opportunity to articulate a choice. Consent is an ongoing process, and the consent form should go over the purpose, the procedures, risks and benefits, confidentiality, and conditions of participation. These are all sections that can be found in our consent form template on our website. And as mentioned, participation must always be voluntary and free of any undue influence or coercion. And the preferred method for documenting consent is written. However, certain situations may require oral consent, which is fine. It just has to be justified and explained in our application or the SPF. The second principle is concern for welfare. So risks don't just include physical risks, but also psychological or even reputational. So for example, employees who criticize their employers, right? And so how do we, so what are the risks and benefits? How are risks mitigated? And how do we attempt to maximize the benefits while minimizing the risks? And how do we, what do we do to put in place to protect these types of participants? Or to protect participants from any of these types of risks. The third principle is justice. So participants must be treated fairly and equitably. Fairness means treating all people with equal respect and concern. Equity requires distributing the benefits and burdens of research participation in such a way that no segment of the population is unduly burdened by the harms of research or denied the benefits of the knowledge generated from it, okay? And at the minimum, there should be a fair selection of participants that utilizes inclusivity. Of course, there may be certain projects in place where you have to, or where you have to only focus or target a certain segment of the population, and obviously that's fine. You just have to explain, why that's the case for your particular research. But in research projects where there aren't, specific types of groups that you're looking for, that's when we talk about inclusivity should be utilized. So the scope. So we have a cheat sheet available on our website that explains what kind of research is subject to ethics review. So for example, a creative practice that does not necessarily require REB approval, but if you are carrying out research that utilizes creative practice, then that requires REB. And we understand this isn't always clear, so if ever you're unsure, when you have a project that includes a creative practice, please reach out to us and we'll go over the project with you to determine whether ethics approval is required or not. Secondary use of data. So if you're analyzing a data set whereby data were collected anonymously, so no identifiers were collected at the time of data collection, then ethics is not required, okay? However, if identifiers were collected at the time of data collection, even if they have been de-identified or anonymized when you access the data set, then REB review or ethics approval is required, okay? We have a special form on our website for secondary use projects, and the form is just called the secondary use of data form. If you are doing secondary analysis on in addition to anonymous data, that's exempt from ethics approval. There's also an exemption from ethics approval if you are doing analysis of publicly available data sets. There are a couple different reviews in place. So the first one is research that's done for pedagogical purposes, so course-based activities for students, and these are reviewed at the departmental level, okay? And we have an abbreviated version of our application form for this kind of situation. So the next one is minimal risk student projects to fulfill their degree requirements. So a thesis, for example, those would come to our office and they go through the delegated review process whereby the protocol is reviewed by a reviewer of the College of Ethics Reviewers, which is different than the HREC. So minimal risk faculty or staff projects go through the delegated review process and are reviewed by members of the Human Research Ethics Committee, which is the HREC. And all protocols, faculty and or students that are greater than minimal risk will get reviewed at the HREC monthly meeting. So this is just a sample copy here of our summary protocol form, or the SPF. So please always use the most recent version. So just go to our website and access it from there. Please follow the instructions, don't delete sections or any questions, and please note that, NA or not applicable isn't always a sufficient answer. You have to explain why it doesn't apply, right? Especially with regards to the questions around like risks, right? So if you just say not applicable or there are no risks, please explain why there are no risks, because the reviewers have to understand that as part of their process. So in the SPF, so we have, the lay summary. And then we always emphasize, written in everyday lay language. It should be clear, it should be concise. And if you need to use, field specific jargon, that's okay. Just we would say to explain what it means in the lay summary. And then there is scholarly review form. So this is not required for projects that are minimal risk. Only research that's greater than minimal risk and not funded by one of the three major funding agencies. The scholarly review form is not required. And then section 7 covers the different types of participants. So essentially, what type of participants, is there undue influence? How are you recruiting them? What are they doing? Is there an incentive being offered? Section 8 is around informed consent. Section 9, deception, withdrawal, risks and benefits, reportable situations, and confidentiality and data access. Data storage, confidentiality, and access. So informed consent, as I said, usually we usually go for written consent. As I said, you can use oral consent as long as it's justified. Our website has the consent form template on our website and an instruction sheet for how to fill out the consent form. And please feel free to check out the participant consent documentation form on our website that outlines the different forms of consent. When it comes to the consent form, it's important that the consent form is written in everyday lay language and not field-specific jargon in order to ensure it's accessible to all the participants that are being recruited for the project. As I said, with that said, there may be times where you may need to include a term or a concept that is field-specific. In that case, just explain what it means in the consent form. We tell researchers to aim for an 8th grade reading level, and you can always modify the language in the template to suit the needs of your project. When you submit a project, here are some of the documents that you should include. So first and foremost, you need to have the SPF or the application form, okay? Scholarly review form, if it's applicable, recruitment, instruments, and the consent form, okay? So these are the main things that you should have. So the SPF, the consent form, instruments, and recruitment, okay? The debriefing script or debriefing form, that's required if your project has deception, okay? Resources for that you can refer participants to for certain types of risks that might come up. Again, that's only if that's applicable to your project. Letters from participating organizations, again, only if it's applicable to your project. The other thing that you'll need to submit, it's not listed here, is the TCPS core certification. So all researchers, students, and faculty must complete this training if they are working with human-derived data. If you've already submitted it to us and we have it on file, you don't need to resubmit it again. It's just if you've never submitted it to us, then submit it when you submit your first ethics protocol. Projects can be submitted through Conrad if you're a faculty, or by email for students. And if you send it by email, please submit it from your Concordia email, because otherwise we won't open the documents. When you submit a protocol, we'll conduct a risk triage and then send the protocol out for review accordingly, either for delegated review if minimal risk, or bring it to the full committee at the monthly meeting if it is greater than minimal risk. Once reviewed, there are a few different statuses that can be attributed to your protocol. So they're approved, approved with comments, conditional, queries, and not approved. You don't really need to worry about the not approved. That rarely ever happens. Most often, it's usually conditional approval or queries, whereby there are some questions or concerns with your project that need to be addressed. So what to do if you get a queries or a conditional approval? Okay, so conditional approval is when there are some minor concerns or questions for clarifications before the protocol can be fully approved. Queries is when either a protocol does not have enough information or there are more major concerns that need to be addressed. And once you respond to the queries, so if you get a queries, once you respond to the queries and revise the documents, the revisions and the responses go back to the original reviewers for another round of review. If you get a conditional, then it'll just be the responses and the revised documents will be reviewed at the administrative level, so myself or my colleague. In both cases, you should provide individual responses to the conditions or the queries, and then revise the documents according to those revisions. according to those comments, excuse me. Amendments. So if you have a project that has received approval, and then at some point you decide that there are some changes you want to make to the project, you can submit an amendment request via email, and the instructions for what to include in an amendment request can be found in the FAQ section of our website. Renewals and study closure. So each year, if you want to renew a project, so a protocol is approved for 1 year, and then each year you need to submit an annual report to keep the protocol active or decide if you want to close the protocol. And while we do try to send out reminders to researchers, it is ultimately up to the researcher to stay on top of their protocols and expiration dates to submit the annual reports accordingly. If there are any unexpected issues that come up that somehow increase the risk for participants or other ethical implications, please reach out to us as soon as possible, so that way we can assist and deal with the situation appropriately and efficiently. And any questions you have regarding ethics, you can just submit it by email to oor.ethics@concordia.ca. Here are our individual emails. So Monica Toka is the manager. She's out right now until the fall. So it is just myself and my colleague, Karen. So I deal with faculty research, and she deals with student research and animal research projects. So if you have projects that include lasers, radiation, or biohazardous materials, then you'll need to reach out to environmental health and safety, as they have their own process in place for how to go about these types of projects. Okay. So does anybody have any questions?
If I may.
Yeah. Thomas?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks for the presentation. I was just looking at the SPF here, and something caught my eye that I was just kind of curious about. It says like independent student research that's not affiliated with a thesis, a course, or the science college undergraduate program are not reviewed by the OOR and will require review by an independent research board.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that, or like what is an IRB, or where, what would people use, for example, for something like that?
Yeah. So we've had students in the past, and sometimes even faculty, who want to carry out research, but it has nothing to do with their affiliation at Concordia. It's just more of like an interest or a passion project of theirs. And so if it's not affiliated with your status at Concordia as a student or as a faculty, then we cannot review it, right? We can only review it if it is related to your status here at Concordia as a student or as a faculty member. There are independent research ethics boards out there. So I think there's one called Veritas, if I'm not mistaken. And some of these might charge you to carry out a review process. So.
Okay, I see. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess so. Well, yeah, maybe I'll send you an email
Okay.
for more. Thank you so much.
No worries. Dr. Imon?
Bonjour. I have a student that we're developing his PhD thesis grant need for ethics, but he is under a grant of my tax, which is I'm PI for. Okay. When we ask for the specific part that is PhD,
yep,
and use this money, where do we go, as a PI or as a student?
Oh yeah, okay. So for my tax projects, so usually, like on the applications, it's like the professor is the PI, and then the student is listed usually as the intern. In terms of ethics, essentially, it can be submitted under the student, but it just comes down to whoever is the actual investigator for the project, right? So if it's his project for his PhD, then it would go under his name. But if it's your project, and let's say you're having him you're listing him on the project as like a research assistant, but it's really your project, then it would be under your name.
Under my name.
Yeah,
Okay.
but if he's the PI and it's like really his project, and it's for his thesis, and you are the faculty supervisor, then the project would be submitted under their name, and then they would list you as the faculty supervisor.
And
It's just for the, it's just for
even
the,
the money comes under my name,
yes, exactly.
we go that way. Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
so there's many times where we have my tax projects that are where the funds are under the professor's name, but the actual project, it belongs to the student. So the student can submit it under their name, and we can link the funds to the protocol. So that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I care.
Yes. Hi, Andrew. My name is Lucy. I work with Dr. Simon Bacon. I just have a question. So I know that in order to get the ethics certificate renewed, you have to submit the annual report.
Mhm.
If you have submitted like an amendment because of changes to the protocol and your certificate is renewed, do you still need to submit the annual report?
If you receive a new certificate with new validation dates, right, then you would just submit the annual report based on the new validation date.
Okay,
Yeah, that's it.
that's good.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So
Thank
if
you.
you so if you submit an amendment request, you don't need to worry about submitting an annual report as well, because usually the amendment might just grant you a new certificate depending on when like, let's say, for example, you submitted an amendment request or an annual report,
Mhm.
and your protocol was issued a new certificate, and then less than a month later you submit another amendment request. In that
And it's a
case,
new date.
we usually don't issue a new certificate. We just go
Mhm.
based on the previous one.
Okay.
But essentially, the renewal for your project will always be based on the validation dates of the newest certificate that you're
Okay.
issued.
Perfect. That makes sense. Thank you so much.
No worries. Any other questions? No?
Okay, I guess that was very clear. So just, I guess on behalf of the School of Health, Andrew, I just want to thank you for this presentation.
Thank you for having me.
And we will be posting it up on our website if anyone wants to refer to the presentation at a later date, or share it with a colleague.
Yeah, and please feel free to send any emails if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.